Max wasn't just any dog. For 7 years, he had been one of the city police department's most trusted canines, a brave, loyal partner who had chased down dangerous criminals, helped locate missing children, and even saved his handler's life on more than one occasion. His reputation was legendary among the officers who worked alongside him. Max was more than a dog. He was a symbol of courage, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. He had the kind of fierce intelligence that made him unstoppable in the field. When Max barked, it wasn't just noise. It was a warning that danger was near and that justice was coming. People who knew Max admired him not just for his work, but for the bond he shared with his handler, Officer Daniels. Together, they were an unbeatable team, known throughout the precinct for their dedication. But all of that changed one day, in a flash, a moment that would shatter everything Max had ever stood for. It had started as a routine call. A robbery suspect had been spotted near a busy city park, and Max and Officer Daniels were dispatched to find and apprehend him. The sun was setting, and the park was crowded with families enjoying the early evening. Max's keen nose picked up the scent, and he zeroed in quickly. Then, chaos erupted. The suspect, a young man with a desperate look, dashed into the crowd, weaving between people who screamed and scrambled to get out of the way. Max, trained to pursue without hesitation, lunged after the fleeing figure. But in the confusion, something went terribly wrong. Max tackled a man who had been standing nearby, an innocent bystander, frozen in shock. The man cried out in pain, clutching his arm, as Max bit down hard, following his instincts. Bystanders gasped and pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The air was thick with fear and confusion. Police officers rushed in to separate Max from the man, but the damage was done. Within hours, the footage was everywhere. Social media exploded with angry posts. News outlets ran headlines calling Max a rogue police dog and questioned the training and control of the K9 unit. The public was divided, but many were quick to condemn. For Max, it was a nightmare come to life. The dog who had spent years risking everything to protect people was suddenly branded a menace. Inside the police department, the mood shifted overnight. Praise turned to whispers. Officer Daniels was devastated but felt powerless as his partner was pulled from duty, reassigned to retirement in the city shelter. The decision came swiftly. To avoid more bad press, Max was to be quietly retired and removed from active service. Max was no longer the proud hero who had answered the call of duty. He was now a disgraced dog, left to face the cold, unfamiliar world of the shelter, a place where dogs were forgotten, where past glory meant nothing. At the shelter, Max's once sharp eyes now carried a heavy sadness. His body, worn from years of work and old injuries, was slowing down. His limp was more noticeable, and the energy that once made him a force to be reckoned with had dimmed. Visitors walked past his kennel, barely glancing. Some pitied him, but most were looking for puppies or younger dogs with no past. Max lay quietly, watching the world move on without him. The echoes of sirens and distant memories of running through the city streets felt like a lifetime ago. The shelter was overcrowded. With so many animals needing homes, older dogs like Max rarely found new families, and the harsh truth was that the shelter simply couldn't afford to keep him much longer. Max's fate was sealed. Without a miracle, he was scheduled to be euthanized within days. As the staff prepared for what they called the final procedure, a small group of workers whispered stories of the dog's heroic past, tales that no longer mattered to the city or the media. Max, the once celebrated K9, was about to be forgotten forever. But sometimes, when hope seems lost, life has a way of surprising us. The shelter was a place of last chances, or no chances at all. For Max, it had become a cold and lonely prison where time was running out. Day after day, the old K9 lay on the hard concrete floor of his kennel, muscles stiffening and spirit fading. Around him, the hustle of the shelter went on. Puppies barking for attention, younger dogs wagging tails eagerly at visitors, and volunteers moving from cage to cage trying to find homes for as many animals as possible. But Max was different. He was older, injured, and carrying the heavy burden of disgrace. The scars from his police work were visible. A limp from a torn ligament, worn-down teeth from years of biting through tough materials, and a slow but steady weariness that crept into his eyes. The shelter staff knew his story, or at least parts of it, and they felt a quiet sadness when they looked at him. Shelter manager Karen had always believed in second chances, but even she knew the harsh realities. Space was tight. Funds were limited. And sadly, dogs like Max who didn't attract new families were pushed to the edge of the system. When the euthanasia schedule was posted, it felt like a death sentence. Max was at the top of the list. Despite the bleak circumstances, there was a flicker of hope. A small group of shelter workers who had been touched by Max's story reached out to the community. They posted photos of Max online, sharing the story of the once heroic dog whose life had been turned upside down by one tragic mistake. Karen watched the post quietly on her phone one evening. The message was simple. Max, a loyal canine, faces his final days alone at our shelter. If anyone can offer him a home, or even just a moment of kindness, please reach out. The post wasn't shared widely at first. The shelter's social media page wasn't popular, and the story seemed almost too sad for people to handle. But then something unexpected began to happen. A few strangers started commenting. Some remembered seeing Max on the news years ago. Others simply felt drawn to the photo of his soulful eyes. Volunteers shared the post in different groups, hoping to spread the word. Still, no one came forward. The clock was ticking. Meanwhile, Max lay in his kennel, barely moving. His body was tired, and the shadow of death hovered over him. The nights were the hardest, quiet except for the occasional bark or whimper from nearby dogs. Max dreamed of his days in the field, running alongside Officer Daniels, the wind rushing past his ears, the thrill of the chase filling his lungs. But he also dreamed of freedom, a home, a warm bed, and someone who would call him by name again. One afternoon, as Karen entered the shelter, she noticed something unusual. Max's tail gave a faint wag, the first in weeks. She knelt by his kennel and whispered gently, "Hang on, boy. Someone might still be out there for you." Across town, Jason wiped his hands on a greasy rag after finishing the last repair of the day at his auto shop. He was tired and ready to close up, but his phone buzzed with a notification. On a whim, he opened the shelter's post about Max. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The dog's eyes, sharp and full of pain, reminded him of a dog he once knew. A dog that had saved his sister from a break-in years ago. Could it be? Jason stared at the screen for a long moment. Despite all the years and the changes, he felt a pull he couldn't ignore. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys. Max's story wasn't just a story, it was personal. He had to act. Back at the shelter, the euthanasia schedule was just hours away. The staff prepared, resigned to the inevitable. Karen took one last look at Max, her eyes glistening with tears. Then the phone rang. "Can you hold him?" Jason's voice was firm but hopeful. "I'm coming now." For the first time in what felt like forever, Max's fate might change. Jason had always been a man of simple habits. Every day, he worked long hours in his small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. His hands were calloused from years of fixing engines, but there was a softness in his eyes when he talked about his family, especially his sister, Emily. Years ago, when she was just a teenager, Jason's world had nearly shattered when burglars broke into their home. It was Max, the police canine on duty that night, who had chased the intruders away and saved Emily from harm. That night had been etched into Jason's memory forever. But since then, life had moved on. And so had Max, or so Jason had thought. When Jason first saw the shelter's post about Max, the worn-out dog's eyes stared back at him with a haunting familiarity. It wasn't just the look. It was the same dog that had once stood guard, fearless and loyal. Could it really be him? The years had passed, and the headlines had long faded, but Jason's gut told him this was no coincidence. He couldn't ignore it. Something inside him stirred, a mix of hope, urgency, and responsibility. Without a second thought, Jason dialed the shelter. "Is Max still there?" he asked, voice steady but eager. "Yes, but we're preparing for the procedure soon," Karen said quietly. "We're running out of time." Jason's heart pounded. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Please don't let him go." He hung up, grabbed his jacket, and climbed into his old pickup truck. The streets blurred past as he sped toward the shelter, the familiar knot of worry tightening in his chest. Meanwhile, at the shelter, Max lay curled in the back of his kennel, unaware that his fate was about to change. The lights flickered overhead, and the sounds of barking dogs echoed through the halls. Volunteers whispered about the man who was coming, the mechanic who believed in a second chance. Karen watched the clock nervously. It was a race against time. She felt a pang of hope. Could this stranger really be the answer for Max? Jason arrived at the shelter breathless but determined. The door opened, and the cold, sterile smell hit him like a wave. He could hear the faint whimpers and the low growls coming from inside. "Where is he?" Jason asked the receptionist. "In the back. Follow me." They walked through the narrow corridors, past rows of cages filled with anxious animals. Then they stopped in front of a kennel where a large dog lay motionless. Jason's breath caught. There was Max, older, weaker, but unmistakably Max. The dog lifted his head slowly as Jason knelt beside him. Jason reached out and whispered, "Maximus, it's me." For a moment, Max's eyes flickered with recognition. The years seemed to melt away as something deep inside the dog stirred, a memory of trust, loyalty, and a bond that no scandal could erase. Jason's voice grew louder, filled with emotion. "You saved my sister, Max. I'm here to save you now." Shelter staff watched in awe as Max's tail gave a tentative wag, a small but powerful sign that the dog's spirit was far from broken. Jason signed the paperwork, promising to give Max a home, care, and respect. He carried Max gently to his truck, feeling the weight of years and pain, but also the spark of new hope. As they drove away from the shelter, Max rested his head on Jason's lap, eyes closing in a rare moment of peace. The mechanic's call had come just in time. But the journey was far from over. Jason didn't waste a second. The moment he had Max safely in his truck, he knew the hardest part was just beginning. The dog looked frail, his breathing shallow, but there was a flicker of life in his eyes that hadn't been there in weeks. Jason promised himself that Max wouldn't spend another day alone or forgotten. The drive back to Jason's modest home was quiet. Max rested his head on the door panel, his once powerful body reduced to a shadow of its former strength. Jason glanced over at him, remembering the stories his sister had told, how Max had always been fearless, brave, and loyal. Now, the dog needed that loyalty returned. Back home, Jason carefully helped Max inside. The small house was filled with the scent of oil and metal, a stark contrast to the sterile shelter where Max had spent his last days. But it was warm, safe, and filled with care. Jason laid out a soft blanket in the corner of the living room, and Max curled up, his eyes half closed. It was clear his body had suffered. Old injuries, exhaustion, and the weight of disappointment hung heavy on him. Jason knew he couldn't do this alone. He called his sister Emily, who rushed over with a bag of supplies and a comforting smile. The two of them took turns sitting with Max, talking softly, brushing his coat, and giving him water and food. Small steps toward healing. But Max's condition was fragile. His limp worsened, and some nights he whimpered in his sleep. Jason could see the pain in his eyes, and it tore at his heart. "We'll get you better, Max," Jason whispered one evening. "I won't let you go. Not now." Despite the odds, Max showed glimpses of his old self, the spark that had made him a hero. One morning, he lifted his head when Jason called his name, a faint wag of his tail betraying his hope. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. Meanwhile, news of Max's rescue started to spread. Volunteers at the shelter shared updates and photos online. The story of the disgraced K9 given a second chance struck a chord with many. People began to rally behind Max, offering support and encouragement. Jason found himself answering calls and messages from strangers who wanted to help. Some even offered to donate for Max's medical care or to spread the word to local news stations. But time was still running out. Max needed veterinary attention that Jason couldn't provide at home. The next day, he took Max to a trusted animal hospital. The vet's examination confirmed what Jason feared. Max's injuries were serious, and his health was fragile. Years of service, combined with age and neglect, had taken their toll. The vet recommended intensive care, medication, physical therapy, and close monitoring. It wouldn't be easy or cheap, but it was the only chance Max had. Jason's mind raced. Between running his auto shop and now caring for Max, he was stretched thin. But he refused to give up. He set up a fundraiser, explaining Max's story and asking for help. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from strangers moved by Max's journey. People who wanted to see this dog live his final days with dignity and love. With funds secured, Max began his treatment. Jason stayed by his side during every appointment, talking to him as if to remind Max of the bond they shared. Every step forward was a battle, but Max fought back with the stubbornness of a true warrior. At home, Max's strength slowly returned. He began to stand longer, walk without so much pain, and even responded to Jason's calls with eager eyes. The old dog, once discarded and forgotten, was finding life again. But Jason knew they still faced many challenges ahead. The road to healing was long, and Max's past still cast a shadow. Yet in that small house filled with the smell of motor oil and hope, a new chapter had begun, one where love, loyalty, and second chances could rewrite a story once thought finished. As the weeks passed, Max's transformation became nothing short of remarkable. What had once seemed like a hopeless case slowly began to inspire everyone who crossed his path. Jason watched with quiet pride as Max, the dog once labeled a menace, started reclaiming his strength and spirit, one slow step at a time. The treatments at the veterinary hospital were rigorous. Physical therapy sessions tested Max's patience and willpower. Jason held his hand gently while Max struggled to stand or walk, each painful movement a small victory. The vet praised the dog's resilience, noting how Max's eyes still held the fierce spark of a warrior, despite his scars and age. At home, Emily took on the role of caretaker with unwavering devotion. She would spend hours brushing Max's fur, soothing him with soft words and gentle strokes. Slowly, Max began to respond, his tail wagging at the sound of her voice, his eyes following her around the room. Jason found new meaning in his work, his days divided between fixing engines and nursing Max back to health. He often joked that he was a mechanic of both machines and hearts. The local community, touched by the story of a dog so unfairly cast aside, followed Max's progress with growing affection. One afternoon, Jason took Max to a nearby park, the very place where the fateful incident had occurred months earlier. Max's steps were tentative, but his nose twitched as he sniffed the familiar scents. Jason knelt beside him, his voice low and steady. "This is your home, Max, not just that shelter or some forgotten kennel. You belong here, with people who care." The sight of Max standing in the sunlight, tail wagging slightly, filled Jason with hope. It was proof that even the deepest wounds could heal. Yet, the scars of Max's past weren't just physical. The dog had been branded in the eyes of the city, his story twisted by headlines and fear. Some neighbors eyed him warily when Jason took him outside, unsure if the dog was dangerous. Jason understood their concerns but refused to let Max's past define him. He became Max's protector and ambassador, patiently introducing the dog to the world again. Slowly, hearts began to soften. Children waved as Max passed by. Passers-by smiled at his calm demeanor. The dog who had once been disgraced was now quietly winning hearts. Then came the day when Officer Daniels called. He had heard about Max's rescue and wanted to reconnect. Jason agreed to meet him. The reunion was emotional. Daniels knelt beside Max, running a hand over his head. "You're still the same dog," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry things ended the way they did." Max nudged Daniel's hand, as if forgiving the past. The bond between handler and canine, forged through years of trust, was never truly broken. Jason realized that Max's story wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption, about the power of second chances and the strength found in unexpected places. That night, Jason sat beside Max, who lay peacefully on his blanket. The room was quiet except for the gentle rhythm of the dog's breathing. "You're home now, buddy," Jason whispered. "And we're just getting started." Max's journey from disgrace to hope wasn't over yet, but the hardest part was behind them. In the quiet corners of a mechanic's shop and the warmth of a small house, a lost hero was finally finding his way back. Max's recovery was a slow but steady process, and as his body healed, so did his spirit. No longer weighed down by the shadow of disgrace, he began to show the confidence and alertness he once had on the force. His eyes, which had looked so tired and distant in the shelter, now gleamed with a renewed sense of purpose. Jason noticed the change every day. Max would eagerly greet him at the door when he came home, tail wagging and ears perked. The old dog who had been ready to give up on life was now looking for reasons to get up and move, to be part of the world again. One afternoon, as Jason worked under the hood of a customer's car, Max sat quietly beside him, watching intently. A local police officer, who had come in for a routine check of his vehicle, noticed Max and stopped to talk. "That's a good-looking dog," the officer said. "What's his story?" Jason smiled, reluctant but willing to share. He told the officer about Max's past, his years of service, the incident that led to his disgrace, and the final moments when Max was saved from the shelter. The officer listened closely, his expression softening. "Sounds like Max still has some fight left in him," he said. "You know, the department has a program for retired canines. They sometimes use them for therapy visits or community outreach." Jason's interest piqued. He had never thought of Max as anything more than a beloved pet and companion, but the idea of giving Max a new mission was appealing. "Maybe it's time for Max to have a second career," Jason said thoughtfully. Over the next few weeks, Jason reached out to the local police department and animal therapy organizations. He wanted to see if Max could be trained to help in community programs, visiting schools, hospitals, or shelters to bring comfort and hope. The idea resonated deeply. Max had been given a second chance, and now he could help others who were struggling, just like he had. Training began cautiously. Max, though older, was intelligent and eager to please. With patience and encouragement, he learned to respond to new commands, interact gently with children, and stay calm in busy environments. Jason and Max attended therapy dog certification classes. At first, Max was unsure in unfamiliar settings, but Jason's steady presence gave him confidence. Soon, Max was passing tests and earning praise for his gentle demeanor. Their first official visit was to a local children's hospital. Jason watched as Max moved quietly from room to room, allowing children to pet him and lean close for comfort. The dog's calming presence brought smiles and soft laughter to faces often marked by pain. Jason saw the impact and felt a surge of pride. Max, the dog once discarded and forgotten, was now spreading hope and healing in his own way. Word spread, and more invitations came for Max to visit community centers, nursing homes, and schools. Each visit reminded Jason why saving Max had been worth every struggle. But the road wasn't without setbacks. Max's old injuries sometimes flared up, and the emotional weight of his past occasionally resurfaced in anxious behaviors. Jason stayed vigilant, balancing rest and activity carefully. One evening after a long day, Max lay quietly at Jason's feet. Jason gently rubbed the dog's ears and whispered, "You're not just a mechanic's dog anymore, Max. You're a hero to so many." Max looked up, eyes full of trust and gratitude. The mechanic and the once disgraced K9 had found something new, a partnership not just of survival, but of purpose. Together, they were proving that even the most broken souls could rise again, and that sometimes a second chance was the greatest mission of all. Despite Max's ongoing recovery and new role in community therapy, shadows from his past still lingered, quiet but persistent. Some nights, Jason would notice Max growling softly in his sleep, ears twitching as if fighting unseen demons. The scars of betrayal and the sting of disgrace hadn't fully healed. One afternoon, as Jason and Max prepared for a therapy visit at a local school, a surprising visitor arrived at the auto shop. Officer Daniels, Max's former handler, stepped inside unannounced. Jason wiped his hands and greeted him. "Didn't expect to see you here." Daniels nodded, a serious look on his face. "I've been thinking a lot about Max, about what happened, about how things ended." Jason gestured toward Max, who lay calmly beside the workbench. "He's doing better now, slowly finding a new life." Daniel sighed deeply. "I owe him, and you, an apology. The department made mistakes. We didn't support Max like we should have, and we didn't handle that incident properly." Jason studied Daniels. There was genuine remorse in his eyes. "It's hard," Daniels continued, "to admit when the system fails the very dogs and officers it relies on. But Max deserved better. He deserved a chance to be heard." Jason nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "We've been looking into improving how retired K9s are treated," Daniel said. "There's talk of creating programs specifically for dogs like Max, dogs who were cast aside unfairly." Jason felt a spark of hope. "I'd like to help with that." The three of them talked for hours about Max's case, the flaws in the system, and what could be done to prevent other K9s from suffering similar fates. Daniel shared inside knowledge, Jason offered practical ideas, and Max listened quietly, his presence a powerful reminder of what was at stake. But the conversation wasn't easy. Past mistakes brought pain, and the wounds ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. In the weeks that followed, Jason noticed a subtle change in Max. The dog seemed more alert, occasionally restless, as if wrestling with memories from his days on the force. One evening, Jason sat beside Max on the porch. "You don't have to carry it all alone, buddy. I'm here." Max leaned into Jason's hand, eyes softening. It was a quiet moment of healing, a reminder that while the past could haunt them, it didn't have to define their future. The community continued to rally around Max, inspired by the bond he shared with Jason and the growing efforts to reform K9 treatment. Local news picked up the story, and soon, Max was no longer just a forgotten dog. He was a symbol of resilience and change. Still, Jason knew the battle wasn't over. Max's journey had opened doors, but real progress would take time and effort from many. Together, they faced the future, wounded but hopeful, scared but unbroken. In the heart of that mechanic's garage, and in the soul of a once disgraced K9, a quiet revolution was taking shape. Max lay comfortably on the soft blanket Jason had spread in the corner of the garage. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the dusty windows. Jason sat beside him, rubbing Max's ears gently, savoring the quiet peace that had once seemed impossible. The journey from disgrace to hope had been long and difficult. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and pain, but also moments of triumph, love, and unexpected joy. Max was no longer just a dog with a broken past. He was a living testament to the power of second chances. The community had embraced Max in ways Jason had never imagined. Local schools invited him regularly for therapy visits, hospitals welcomed his calm presence, and even the police department began to recognize the importance of caring for their K9 heroes after retirement. Jason and Officer Daniels had worked together to start a new initiative, Pause for Redemption, a program designed to support retired canines who had been neglected or wrongly dismissed. The program provided medical care, foster homes, and opportunities for dogs like Max to thrive in new roles. It was a cause close to Jason's heart, and one he was proud to champion. He often thought about how a simple call to the shelter had changed everything, not just for Max, but for so many others. One afternoon, as Jason prepared for another visit with Max, his phone rang. It was Emily. "Jason, you need to see this," she said breathlessly. "There's a news story about Max. It's gone viral." Jason quickly turned on his laptop. The video showed Max calmly comforting a young child in a hospital room, the child's face lighting up with joy as Max rested his head on the bed. The narrator told Max's story, a tale of courage, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Comments flooded in from viewers around the world, praising Max's resilience and the love that had saved him. Some shared their own stories of rescue dogs and second chances, creating a wave of support and awareness. Jason felt a lump in his throat. Max had become more than a dog. He was a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or forgotten. That evening, as Max lay beside the fireplace, Jason reflected on everything they had been through. The scars on Max's body remained, but they no longer told a story of defeat. They were marks of survival, courage, and an unbreakable spirit. "Thank you, Max," Jason whispered, "for trusting me, for fighting, for teaching me what it means to never give up." Max looked up, eyes shining with quiet understanding. Jason knew their story wasn't just theirs. It belonged to every soul who needed a second chance, and as long as he was around, Max's legacy would live on. The disgraced K9 had faced his final moments alone and forgotten. But thanks to a mechanic who shouted his name, his story had changed forever. And in the hearts of many, Max would always be a hero.